Yes, it's time for the 2016 Olympics. By far, my favorite event is synchronized
Microjig, maker of the gripper. Work safer, work smarter.
In a recent woodworking basics video, I discussed using solid lumber versus plywood in your projects. There are all kinds of reasons why you might choose one or the other, and each project is different. One reason you might want to use solid wood is if you plan on creating an edge profile, say a roundover or some other decorative shape. If you cut these in plywood, its layers will be exposed, and that might not be the look you're going for. It's certainly easy enough to use solid wood for small projects, but what if you wanted to build something big, like a solid wood tabletop? You can't buy a single board that would be wide enough. Most trees just don't grow that big. The solution is to make your own wide boards. Making wide panels is really pretty simple. You just glue together boards along their edges. You will need a table saw and a jointer, but if you don't have a jointer, you can make a simple edge jointing jig to use on your table saw. More about this in a minute. You'll need clamps, wood glue, and a little patience. Start by finding the straightest board you can from the lumberyard or home center. It doesn't need to be particularly wide. I usually use 1x4s or 1x6s. Boards that are wider than that are often warped and would require additional preparation beyond the scope of this video to flatten them out. Figure out what the finished length of your tabletop or panel needs to be and cross-cut the boards a little bit longer. Cut enough boards so that when they're all glued together, they'll be wider than you need your finished panel to be. Basically, just be sure to make your panel slightly oversized so that you can cut it down to its actual size later. Even if you have pretty straight boards, it might look like you could just glue them together now, but resist the temptation. Most likely the edges aren't mating together perfectly. If you could fit a sheet of paper between them, the glue probably won't bond as well and the seam will show. The edges of the board need to be jointed, but don't get confused by that term. Jointing a board just means cutting the edges straight and square to the face of the board and making the two edges parallel with each other. That's different than a woodworking joint that joins two pieces of wood together like a box joint or a dovetail joint. A jointer doesn't make joints, but jointed edges will meet together perfectly to create a strong connection. You can use a specialized tool called a jointer, but if you're like me and don't have one, you can also edge joint using your router table or making a special jig like this one to use on your table saw. I have links in the description on how to make both of these. The workpiece gets clamped down and the edge of the sled rides along my rip fence, making the cut edge parallel with my rip fence, no matter how crooked the board is. I like to mark the edge of the board I just jointed so I won't forget. The key thing to understand about any jointing operation is that you only joint one edge of a board using your jointer, not both. So you'll never joint one edge, then flip the board over and joint the opposite edge. They won't be parallel. Instead, after using your jointer or jointing jig on one edge, you'll run that edge along your rip fence to make a parallel cut on the opposite edge. It's very satisfying to see how perfectly boards fit together once they're jointed. It's really worth taking the time to play with the positioning of the boards until you get the grain pattern to look the way you want it. I really like the way these two come together and create an invisible seam. This one has these wavy patterns that might look better this way, and I kind of think it does. If you look on the ends of the board, you'll see which way the grain curves, and a lot of people like to reverse one of the directions so that these two are curved this way, this one curves that way. I don't think it makes any difference which way the boards go. Pipe clamps are definitely the most affordable solution for clamping together your panels. They're available at any hardware store or home center. You buy these orange jaws separately as a pair, then you buy these black pipes to whatever length you want. This part just screws onto one of the threaded ends. And then this part has this little spring mechanism that holds it in place. I like like to keep several different lengths of pipe clamps on hand because they're so inexpensive. I've even got this 5-foot long one. The important thing is to have everything ready to go so that once you get the glue on, you can just move right through the process. I want to talk for a moment about biscuits. No, not the flaky, buttery kind, but these wooden ones. There's a bit of controversy about how effective they are. About 20 years ago, biscuit joiners, that's joiner without a T, were very popular for gluing up panels. All the tool does is cut slots along the edge of a board. Then you glue these wooden biscuits into the slots. The idea here is that the glue will cause the biscuits to swell inside of the board, strengthening the joint. You can still buy biscuit joiners, and a lot of people still use them. However, most testing now seems to indicate that they don't really add any strength to a joint. They can be useful for helping you keep the edges of really long boards aligned, but I don't think that justifies the cost of buying a biscuit joiner. I no longer use one for gluing together panels. They're perfectly strong without the biscuit joints. Remember, the glue itself is stronger than the wood. I'll apply the glue to just these two boards. The important thing here is to make sure that you spread it evenly. It doesn't take a lot of clamping pressure to hold these together. I'll just slightly tighten them down for now. If you don't see any of the glue squeezing out, it probably means you didn't use enough. To make sure the faces of the boards are flush, you can use cauls like these. These are just boards that I've put a piece of packing tape on them so that glue doesn't stick. And I'll clamp those together. I'm just loosely clamping these for now. Now I can start to apply more pressure to the sides. Again, not a whole lot. And it's important to put a couple of clamps on the top side too to prevent it from bowing. Usually I just sight along the edge to make sure that it's flat, but if you're real particular, you can use a straight edge. If you want, you can scrape off the excess glue when it's slightly dry. I usually like to plan my panel glue ups at the end of the day so I can just let it dry overnight. This is always the fun part, to see how it all turned out. I'll sand off the rest of the glue and smooth it out. You could also run this through a planer if you have one. And once you've got your panel all smoothed out, you can cut it down to its final size. I used that panel to create the bottom of last week's serving tray project. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this week's Step It Up video. I hope this gave you the confidence to make your own panels and take your woodworking to the next level. Please click on the box on the left to see all the videos in my Woodworking Basics series covering topics every woodworker should know. And click the box on the right to see the latest video from Tom over on my second channel, Home and Garden for Mere Mortals. We post 2 new videos every week on HGMM covering all sorts of home lifestyle projects. I hope you'll check it out and subscribe. Don't forget to look in the description for links to all the stuff I mentioned in this video. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I'll see you next week.